Ever since the launch of Slay the Spire 2, there's been a lot of discussion online about the game, as there should be, as I expected there to be. Most of the discussion is, as you would expect, focused on playing the game well. I have consumed quite a bit of it myself. People have also talked about the game design, about the doormaker, about the Nibbit, about many other factors about the game which are important and worthy of discussion. And this is fantastic. This is great. Slay the Spire 2 is a very fun game, and I'm glad that people are paying it the attention that it deserves. However, there is a very important topic which I believe has not received the amount of attention that it warrants. I am here today to walk through a very important question about the Regent and a very important revelation about what is actually happening when you play a run with the Regent. In particular, I posit that there is a secret game that the Regent is playing in Slay the Spire 2, and perhaps more importantly, I'm going to explore the question, does he suck at that game? The answer may surprise you. The exact way that we get there almost certainly will. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. I think I owe it to my viewers who have not played Slay the Spire before to spend a bit of time setting the stage and explaining what is Slay the Spire. We must begin in 2017 when the course of history altered irreparably. I obviously am not talking about geopolitical events here, I am talking about the roguelike deck builder genre itself. In particular, in 2017, Slay the Spire launched in early access. I guess I will tell you it's good because the whole premise here is I'm doing this explanation for people who have not played Slay the Spire. If you have not played Slay the Spire, then please take it on faith. Slay the Spire is a good game. I do suspect that most of you have, simply based on the numbers. It is very likely that you have played Slay the Spire and in fact have played 40 or more hours of it. But if you have not, it is a good game. It is a roguelike deck builder, which means it is both a roguelike and a deck builder. Roguelike obviously meaning that there isn't one single long core playthrough like there is in, say, a Legend of Zelda game or a Mario game, where basically like you're telling one long story about how you got from point A to point Z. In a roguelike, you are playing runs. You start off in a similar place each time you begin a run. You try to make it through the game. The game throws some procedurally generated challenges at you that are going to be different each time. No single run is going to look exactly the same as any other single run. As you go through the run, you will get random rewards, you will see random encounters, things will progress differently, but a good roguelike usually, there is enough thematic coherence and mechanical coherence that even if no run is exactly the same as others, there are actually core skills to get good at. What sort of skills? Slay the Spire is a deck builder. If you've ever played the game Dominion, it is a lot like that. You start off with a small deck full of weak cards that can't do very much. In Dominion, those are coppers and estates. In Slay the Spire, those are strikes and defends. Over the course of the game, you will use your weak cards to get ways to make your deck better, to the point where at the end of the game, you are doing things that are genuinely orders of magnitude more powerful than what your weak early game deck could do. So in Dominion, your early turn might be, okay, I play 3 coppers and buy a single card that costs 3. And your end game might be, I play every single card in my deck once. That gives me 24 money and 3 buys, and I will buy 3 cards that cost 8 money. In Slay the Spire, early turns may be, okay, I play 1 strike for 6 damage, and I play 2 defends to block for 10. Turns in the late game may literally be infinite. I will play an arbitrarily large number of cards, and I will deal an arbitrarily large amount of damage, and I will block for an arbitrarily large amount of block. It turns out a roguelike is a fantastic macro framing to put deck builder mechanics into, and it turns out that deck builder mechanics, with this built-in randomness of shuffling the deck, is a fantastic set of mechanics to apply the roguelike formula to. The union of the two is much stronger, much more interesting, much more fun to play than you would expect from just looking at the parts by themselves. In many ways, Slay the Spire is like having chocolate and peanut butter and ending up with a gigantic candy empire that makes you billions of dollars a year. As you would expect from the fact that these mechanics put together is so interesting and so fun to play. And the fact that Slay the Spire got as popular and as successful as it did, there was, in following years, a sudden and precipitous rise in roguelike deck builders, what I would describe as Spire-likes, where it is not just a roguelike and a deck builder, but there is a specific theme of fighting against enemies, and you have to both defend yourself with some notion of health, but also attack them with some notion of strength. I'm not just saying this in a vacuum. I'm not just saying, oh, there were a lot of games that were like Slay the Spire. Roguelike deck builders exploded in popularity in the years following 2017. If you look on Steam today, there are over 1,000 games in the roguelike deck builder genre. That is an enormous number of games for such a specific niche, such a specific combination of mechanics. I took this screenshot without looking very closely at it, and I am realizing now that there is a game on Steam called The Bible Roguelike Deck Builder, which I think is maybe the best proof I can give for this point. And it was completely unintentional, and I'm kind of losing my shit right now because that's very funny. So, very popular following 2017, gigantic explosion of the genre to the point where there's 1,100 plus of them today. With a gigantic number of games out of there, it is essentially impossible to play all of them. Even if you just narrow down to the top rated, the field is so wide. I mean, there are extremely well-known ones up here like Balatro, like Slay the Spire, like Monster Train. But I'm going to ask, and please be honest with yourself and be honest with me. Have you played all of these games, all of these top-rated roguelike deck builders? Have you even heard of all of these top-rated roguelike deck builders? If you said yes, that actually concerns me greatly because I snuck a fake game into this list. Quiddler's Folly is not a real game. It is a Photoshop image that I put together in a very small number of minutes, as you can probably tell by the fact that the thinker does not fully adhere to the bottom of the frame of the image. Quiddler itself is like the name of a party game involving cards, but it's not even like a word that we use. It's like an antiquated, outdated word for like a time waster or idler. The game I was covering up was Monster Train 2. That is the actual other top-rated roguelike deck builder on this list. But my point remains, I would be surprised if the vast majority of the people watching this video have played even just the top-rated roguelike deck builders. There has been such a proliferation, such a profusion. This genre has gotten so big that it's almost impossible to play even the all-stars from it. And I think there's a natural question to ask, which is, why? What did Slay the Spire do so well that it created this enormous cottage industry? And that's a good question. We need to talk about what exactly Slay the Spire is and what it does well. So in Slay the Spire, you play as a person. We'll talk more about the person that you play as later. That person is trying to ascend the titular spire. You are trying to make it to the top of the spire. To make it to the top of the spire, you have to play multiple acts. There's an Act 1, an Act 2, an Act 3, and in Slay the Spire 1, there is an Act 4 as well if you meet certain conditions. Each act contains a number of floors. If you are trying to get to the top of the spire, you have to climb some stairs. You have to go between floors. What is in each floor varies. So there are combats. Combats are the most common types of floors. In a combat, you, the character on the left, this is the Necrobinder specifically, you are faced up against an enemy or a group of enemies. You have a health bar. You have a certain amount of health. The enemy has a health bar. They have a certain amount of health. Whichever side makes the health bar on the other side run out wins. It's what you would expect when you hear the word combat. You are fighting a thing that is trying to kill you. In this case, the Sludge Spinner is the enemy. The Sludge Spinner this turn is attacking for 8 damage. If that is not blocked, it will just mean the Necrobinder loses 8 health. Well, technically 7 because of Osti, but the Necrobinder will lose health and get closer to 0 on the health bar. The Sludge Spinner is also applying a debuff to the Necrobinder, which will make the Necrobinder less effective in combat. Now, how can the Necrobinder keep those things from happening and start to actually win the combat by whittling the HP down to 0? The answer is the cards. In this case, the Necrobinder has 7 cards in the hand. The Necrobinder can't just instantly play all of these cards. There is a resource on the left here called energy. Generically, characters start each turn with 3 energy, and most cards have an energy cost of at least 1. Some have a cost of 0, but most have a cost of 1 or more than 1. So the Necrobinder can't just go willy-nilly and play all of the cards in her hand this turn, she has to be a little bit strategic and say, okay, I've got this 3 energy to spend. I'm going to pick the best 3 energy of cards to play. Unleash and Strike both deal damage. Right hand also deals damage. Negative Pulse and Defend both block. Negative Pulse also applies a debuff to the Sludge Spinner. You've got all of these options. You're going to need to spend your energy in the best way so that you win combat. That is essentially what's going on in a combat floor. There are also elite floors. Elites are like a combat just with higher stakes. The enemy is more powerful, the enemy is more tanky, the enemy does unique things that other enemies don't do in most cases. So for instance, these are the Phantasmal Gardeners. They have a unique gimmick where whenever you hit them with an attack, they gain a shield for the rest of the turn. Normally, in a multi-enemy fight like this, you would say, oh, great, I'm gonna whittle one of them down quickly so it stops attacking me and it stops buffing, and the rest of the fight is easy to deal with. That's actually fairly difficult to do with the Phantasmal Gardener, because every time you hit one of them, it probably negates your next attack. It's very frustrating. This is a very annoying fight to play against. You have to have good area of effect skills and attacks that target multiple enemies at once to get through it well. And realistically, and this is the case for most elites, you also just have to say, I'm going into this knowing that I'm going to take some damage, and the rewards for beating the elite are worth the damage I'm going to take. Think of these basically as the mini bosses of Slay the Spire. There are also shops. As you win combats, as you win against elites, you get gold. Gold can be spent at shops to make yourself stronger. Some of the stuff that the merchant sells, the merchant sells cards. You can just buy cards and put them in your deck. One of the cards is guaranteed to be a power. Powers are ways that you scale over the course of the game. Okay, I play a power once, and I just have that effect for the rest of the combat. There are also colorless cards, which don't fit into any individual character's card pool or gimmick, which means you can't get them from normal card rewards, but they are just generic powerful effects. Like gain a potion is a powerful effect that doesn't inherently fit into any of the character's card pools, so it's a colorless card. You can also buy potions. You can also buy relics. Relics are similar to powers, except you don't have to play them. They kind of just sit in the top row. That's just a static effect you always have. For instance, if you buy Blood Vial, then every single combat and elite and boss, it counts both of those. Every single combat for the rest of the run, you will heal 2 HP at the start of it. One of the best ways to get super powerful in Slay the Spire is to stack a bunch of relics that give you a bunch of small, and in some cases large, effects that you just always benefit from. There is also, at the bottom right of the screen here, Card Remove. One of the most important services that the merchant offers is the ability to remove one of the bad cards from your deck. If you remove a bad card from your deck, you never have to draw it again. It doesn't junk up your deck when you're trying to draw your more powerful cards. This is an effect so powerful that it both costs a reasonably large amount of gold, and also you can only do it once per merchant. So it incentivizes you to seek out multiple merchants over the course of the run so that you can remove cards multiple times. So merchants are good. They're a way that you can turn one of the resources in the game into just power, into being stronger and being able to win more challenging fights. There are also chests. You find treasure chests through the course of Slay the Spire. Treasure chests, you open them up, they have money, they have a relic. Great. There are question marks. Question marks can become a normal combat. They can become a shop, but sometimes they are events. Events are sort of a choose-your-own-adventure vignette taking place in the Spire. For instance, the one you see on the screen here, the Future of Potions, it's going to take one of your potions and trade that for a good card reward. But you get to choose which potion. You don't get to use that potion in future fights, so there's some strategy in choosing which potion to get rid of. There's also strategy, I might want to give up a better potion so that I get a better reward. Events tend to do something like this where you pay some sort of cost and get some sort of benefit. In some cases, it's relatively small. Giving up a single potion is usually not that big of a deal. There are also cases where it's like, okay, lose a small amount of HP and gain a reasonably sized amount of money. There are also cases you pay a big cost and get a big reward. Like, I'm going to add a curse to my deck, which is a useless card that doesn't do anything, and I can't remove it. it. In exchange for adding that useless card to my deck, I get a lot of money, or I get a lot of gained max HP, or something like that. So events are, again, a way of paying a cost to make your overall setup stronger, but with this nice little narrative choose your own adventure flair. Events are great. There are also campfires, rest sites. In a campfire, you have options. Resting heals HP. This is one of the only ways to reliably heal HP in Slay the Spire. You typically will take some incidental chip damage in fights. You typically in elites are going to take a reasonably large amount of damage just because elites are stronger and deal more damage in the first place. Resting is very important because if your HP ever hits 0, you die, which is not good, I've been told. If you're at a high enough HP value right now that you don't need to rest, you can also smith. Essentially, you choose one of the cards in your deck and you upgrade it. Upgraded cards are more powerful, their numbers are bigger, they do more stuff for the same amount of energy, or in some cases, the upgrade reduces the energy cost so you can do more in your turn overall. More upgraded cards is better. There are some relics that give you additional options at a campfire. You can see, for instance, here, the Girya relic. Instead of resting or smithing, I could also choose to train, which uses up the campfire but gives me +1 strength for the remainder of the run. So that's essentially what the floors do, except for one, which is the boss. There is a boss at the end of each act. The bosses are powerful and threatening enough that essentially you need to be planning your entire act around being able to beat that boss. If you walk into them unprepared, they will annihilate you. And it isn't just a matter of being able to block and defend. In many of them, their gimmick requires you to be able to scale the amount of blocking and defending you can do as well. In many of them, it basically says, all right, you need to be able to do all of that, but also I'm going to add a bunch of junk cards to your deck so that it's harder for you to draw all of your good cards and do that stuff. As you would expect from the name, the boss is powerful. You need to be prepared to beat the boss. And it is the real challenge of Slay the Spire. There are many times where you can easily get through the act, but you will just die to the boss. This is an example of a boss. This is the Lagavulin Matriarch. Compare this to the elite. The pool of HP was around 120 total. Compare it to the single normal enemy around 40. The Lagavulin Matriarch is an Act 1 boss, comparable in terms of when in the game you face her, and she has 222 health. The numbers are very large. Also, attacking for 22 damage right now, that's quite strong. The numbers are large. The challenge is large. You need to be able to beat these things despite the fact that it is difficult. Which brings up a natural question. How exactly do you play Slay the Spire? As we talked about, Slay the Spire is a roguelike. That means you are playing many individual runs versus a single long core playthrough that lasts for tens of hours. You start from scratch every run. You start with that deck of weak cards every single time, and it is basically the same deck of weak cards within a given character every single time. Slay the Spire is a deck builder. As we said, there is a starter deck of weak cards. There are many ways to upgrade your deck. We've talked about a number of them. There are card rewards. We didn't specifically talk about card rewards, but when you beat a combat, you were offered a card reward. You click on it and it says, hey, these are 3 cards. You can take one of them or you can leave. It's up to you. You don't have to take the cards, but you can. There is a reasonable chance that you will find a card that is better than the cards that you have in your deck right now, especially early on in these card rewards, and they represent one of the most important ways to make your deck more powerful. It turns out when you put better cards into your deck is better. There are also relics, as we talked about. Those are just static effects that sit around. You don't have to play a card to activate them. They just are always there. You also have potions, which are one-time use effects. You may have a potion that says, drink this potion and you gain 2 strength for the rest of this encounter. And so you can do that. You can drink the strength potion and you have 2 strength for that fight, but then you don't get the potion back. It's gone. You have drunk it. The specific effects that you can get from potions are wide and varied. There are some that upgrade cards in your hand. There are some that let you grab a card from your deck. There are some that interact with mechanics specific to the characters, like, oh, this one takes any card that has the word strike in it and when you play it this combat, it's played an extra time. The point is, potions are a powerful effect that you only get to use once. There's a real push and pull with figuring out when to use a potion to get the maximum reward, but also not completely hoarding them, because if you get a new potion and you have to give up a potion because there's limited capacity for potions, and you didn't get any benefit from the potion that you just gave up to get the new potion, then you did play somewhat suboptimally before that. There are also ancients or boss relics, depending on Slay the Spire 1 versus Slay the Spire 2. Ancients and boss relics are, in many ways, the single biggest power boost you get in your runs. These are things like, oh, you have 3 energy in a turn. At a cost, you're going to have 4 energy instead. Or things like, instead of discarding your hand every turn and then drawing 5 at the start of the next turn, you don't discard the cards in your hand. They stick around. You still draw 5 at the start of the next turn, but you don't discard your cards, which makes it much easier to put together combos or save a particularly powerful card for a turn when it's most powerful. There are also cards that are added via events. You saw an example of that earlier with the Future of Potions. You give up a potion and you get a card reward. There are also cards that are unique to events. For instance, oh, you pick up this bird egg, and at the next campfire, you hatch the bird egg, and now you have a card that costs 0 energy and deals 14 damage. You can't get that card any other way in the entire game. You can only get it via an event. There are also card removes, as we discussed. That's one of the most important ways to upgrade your deck. Every strike you remove is a strike you don't have to draw. In terms of how things work on a given turn, so you get energy, you start with 3. Some relics can increase that number, some cards can increase that number, but you get 3 energy each turn. If you use it, then great. If you don't, you lose it. It exhausts at the end of the turn, and then you'll get 3 at the start of the next turn. You also draw cards each turn. Starting is 5. There are some relics that affect that. There are some powers that affect that, but you'll draw 5 cards each turn. If you use them, great. If you don't, you discard them at the end of the turn, and you draw 5 at the start of the next turn. Cards have an energy cost. You use your energy to play cards, as we discussed. Generally, cards will do one of a few things. They will deal damage to the enemy. They will generate blocks so you don't take damage from the enemy. They will draw you cards. They will buff yourself, either via a, oh, this turn you gain 1 strength type effect, or via a power, which, as we discussed, is an effect you put in play and you just kind of have that static effect for the rest of the combat. Or you can debuff the enemies. For instance, apply weak to the enemy so they deal less damage to you this turn, or apply vulnerable to the enemy so that they take more damage from your attacks this turn. Now that you have a good sense of how Slay the Spire is played, a natural next question to ask is, okay, you mentioned you play as a person early on in this video. Who are the people that you play as in Slay the Spire? It is a great question. So first of all, we have the Ironclad, aka Jim Swords. Swords was obviously just the given family name. It just happened to work out as well as it did. The Ironclad is essentially the warrior archetype of Slay the Spire. Swords and boards, a big sword, a big shield. But he's got a demonic twist as well. A big theme of the Ironclad's cards is power at a price. You've got the big swords, or in this case, the big mace, a big dumb attack, deal some damage, apply vulnerable so that your other attacks deal more damage. Cards that raise your strength, there's like a big sub-theme of raising strength on the Ironclad. In Flame, if you apply it to a strike, just adds 2 damage. If you apply it to Sword Boomerang, which hits 3 times, it adds 6 damage. There's also a sub-theme of exhausting your cards, which what exhaust does is it removes that card from your deck for the rest of this combat. So True Grit applies a larger amount of block than a Defend does, but it's at the cost of exhausting a random card from your hand for the rest of combat. There are obviously synergy packages for this. When you're exhausting cards, cards like Feel No Pain are more powerful. There are also some cards that gain benefits from being exhausted, like Sentinel. So there's sort of the exhaust sub package, which is one flavor of power at a price. There's also the power at a price concept of adding a bad card to your deck. So in this case, Wild Strike is a much more powerful attack than a strike is, but at the cost of having to shuffle a wound, which is a useless card that you can't play, does nothing, and junks up your draws into your deck. There are obviously, again, cards that key off of that as a synergy, like Fire Breathing, where when you draw your status cards, you deal some damage to the enemy. But ultimately, when you put things together for the Ironclad, the real theme is power at a price. Maybe that means you get to play more cards, but at the cost of immediately them exhausting themselves. Maybe that means big one-shot effects where you get a bunch of output for a single card, but you don't get to use that card again the entire rest of the battle. Maybe it means something like Demon Form, where you have to spend your entire turn putting it into play, which means it's very likely you're going to take damage from the enemy that turn, but you get an extraordinarily powerful effect like gain strength every single turn for the rest of combat. Or it can be very direct, like offering, literally making an offering to the demonic entity that fuels the Ironclad's power, where you are paying your own life points, but you then get to gain a bunch of energy and draw a bunch of cards and do a bunch of stuff. And it's actually very likely that the 6 HP you lost that turn, you end up saving because of the amount of output that you're able to put out that turn. Power at a cost for Gem Swords. There's also the Silent, aka Miss Stabs a Lot. She is the rogue archetype of Slay the Spire. So a bunch of knives rather than a single large sword. Dodging things. Applying poison. The death by 1,000 cuts approach. Literally in the case of the card 1,000 Cuts, which is in her card pool. The idea, like really the feel of the Silent is you're supposed to always stay one step ahead of the enemy. The Ironclad can heal at the end of each combat. The Silent doesn't get to do that. You have to stay one step ahead and not take the damage in the first place. The starter cards for the Silent apply Weak, which makes a single enemy deal less damage that turn. Also, there's Survivor, which gains a larger amount of block than a Defend would, and you discard one card, which is sometimes a cost and sometimes a benefit in this game. Card draw is just a big mechanic for the Silent. The Silent is very good at drawing cards, with cards like Acrobatics. There are cards that benefit from cards being discarded, like Eviscerate, which costs less each time you discard cards. Cards that play automatically when you discard them, like Reflex. There is also a sub-theme, as we mentioned, like a lot of little knives, 1,000 cuts, rather than a single big sword. A lot of the Silence cards generate something called a Shiv, which is a single weak attack that deals 4 damage and exhausts, but costs 0 energy to play. There are cards that just straight up create a bunch of Shivs. There are cards that power up your Shivs. There's also a sub-theme of poison. If the enemy has N poison, then they take N damage at the end of their turn, and the poison stack decreases by 1. It goes to N-1. So Deadly Poison only deals 5 damage this turn, but if you look at this turn and next turn, it deals 9. And obviously, if you have multiple cards with poison on them, you can stack up that number and really get to big damage numbers very quickly. For instance, Catalyst, if you have a decent amount of poison on an enemy and you double it, that enemy's gonna die pretty quickly. The theme overall, stay one step ahead. Adrenaline, draw some cards, gain some energy, just to make sure that you don't take damage. Bullet time. No more drawing this turn, but you get to play everything in your hand. 1,000 cuts. Whenever you play a card, Blade Dance for instance, you play 4 cards for 1 energy. So it truly is death by 1,000 cuts to your enemies. That's essentially how things work for the Silent. There is the Defect, aka Charles Lightning. I did not come up with this name. I owe this name to Jorbs. It's basically a perfect name for the Defect. That robot is named Charles Lightning. Like that, it is simply canon. It is simply correct. The Defect is the Mage archetype. The Defect has a number of what essentially boil down to spells, magical resources that kind of float around it. They are themed as orbs in the game, like there is a lightning orb, which deals damage, a frost orb, which applies block. There's a darkness orb, which slowly grows and grows and grows. And when you evoke it, it deals a bunch of damage. And then there's Plasma, which gives you energy. Think of these as little spells, little magical resources that kind of float around. There are 2 unique scaling resources for Charles Lightning. There's the number of orbs that you can have in play, your orb slots. And then there's also what is called focus. If you have more focus, the orbs themselves do more stuff. Basically, what the Defect is trying to do is build an inevitable late game. If you get to the very late game with the Defect, usually you're going to win because you just have enough orbs and each of those orbs is doing enough that you have so much passive output every turn that it almost doesn't matter what you play. Like you can almost just click end turn and do nothing and the orbs will do it for you. The defect starter cards include cards that let you channel a lightning orb, and cards that let you evoke an orb. Basically, you trade in the orb being there for a more powerful version of its effect. Obviously, one of the big things you would expect for the defect, with orbs being a very important part of its game plan, are ways to create orbs like Cool-Headed or Doom and Gloom or Fusion. There is also a sub-theme in the defect, Powers Matter. You get benefits from playing a bunch of powers in the course of a single combat. Storm, you get to channel lightning every time you play a power. Heat Sinks, you get to draw a card every time you play a power. Creative AI, you're probably only going to have a certain number of powers in your deck, but Creative AI gives you a new one every single turn, so you can keep triggering stuff like Storm and Heat Sinks. The defect has more tools related to playing a power than either the Ironclad or the Silent do, which is one of the reasons it is such a late game inevitable scaling machine. The idea is get your orb slots, get your focus, build this inevitable late game, and you win. There is also the Watcher. Essentially, her mechanic is she gets very angry, her attacks deal double damage, and the enemy dies. The Watcher is the monk archetype, but in a sense is kind of the god archetype in the sinners in the hands of an angry god sense. There is nothing that is as powerful as the Watcher. The Watcher destroys everything in her path. I think a good question to ask is, now that you know what all of these characters do, why are they there? What do they do from a game design perspective? What do the characters in Slay the Spire teach us? The Ironclad essentially teaches us your health is a resource, both in the sense of there are the self-damage cards that literally take health away from the Ironclad, but also in the sense of his starting relic heals HP every single fight. So the idea is pay some of your health, win the fight faster, gain that health back, and it basically teaches you it's okay to spend health as a resource in this game. That is a thing that is expected. It's a thing you should not be afraid of doing. The Silent, by contrast, does not have that healing relic. Her relic is, on turn 1, draw 2 more cards than normal. And on the face of it, that seems incredibly weak. Compare it to Burning Blood. If you're actually getting the benefit from Burning Blood every single combat, we're talking about over 100 health. When your starting health is like 80, you're healing more than the health that you start with at the start of the game every single run. How could that possibly be worse than draw 2 cards on a single turn of the combat? And the answer is turn 1 is extremely important. It is extremely common, both early in the run and all the way through it, that drawing an extra couple cards on turn 1 before you have your powers set up, before you have the inevitable late game, drawing an extra few cards on that turn often saves you as much health as Burning Blood would have healed, potentially much more. Really, what the Silent teaches us as we play Slay the Spire is turn 1 is an extremely important turn. You should build your deck so that you can do useful things on turn 1. The defect essentially asks, okay, you've learned that your health is a resource. You've learned that turn 1 is important. Can you put those lessons together with a new system and show that you have mastery of that new system? Basically, you've learned the basics, the training wheels are off, figure out how to play the game with this extra wrinkle thrown in. And then the Watcher teaches us that game balance is very hard. Genuinely, this is not a strike against Mega Crit in any way. The Watcher has a mechanic that is immensely interesting and very fun to play, but is also just kind of a balance nightmare. Like it's very hard to tune her mechanic and her cards in a way that is both fun to play and also not oppressively powerful. The Watcher is the Watcher. Now that we know who the characters in Slay the Spire 1 are, we need to talk about Slay the Spire 2, and back to the central thesis of this video, we need to talk about the Regent. In 2026, the course of history altered irreparably once more when Slay the Spire 2 released in early access. I would tell you it's good, but again, by the numbers, it is very likely that you are currently playing Slay the Spire 2 while listening to this video in another tab. Why is Slay the Spire 2 good? In a very simple sense, I would say it's because it's Slay the Spire but more. There are new cards, there are new relics, there are new acts, which means there are new enemies, new events, new bosses. There's even an alternate Act 1, so instead of just 3 new acts, there are 4 new acts. There's a new boss relic system called Ancients, which has a ton of variety. All of the things about Slay the Spire 1, where basically there was all of the variants and all of the randomness that made each run unique, it feels like that amped up to like another new level in Slay the Spire 2, which is really fun. There's also, very importantly, in Slay the Spire 2, you can have pets. You can have a little bird following you around. You can have a little flesh guy following you around. There are pets in the game. It's fantastic. It's great. There are also new characters. Instead of just having the Ironclad and the Silent and the Defect, there's also the Regent and the Necrobinder. I'm not primarily here to talk about the Necrobinder today, but I do just want to very quickly note that the Necrobinder is great. You've got this skeleton, essentially a Grim Reaper skeleton, pulsating with purple doom energy, with the long flowing cape and the big scythe, casting spells that doom the enemy, and amazing. Fantastic aesthetics. The gimmick with Asti is super interesting from a gameplay sense, but also, maybe most importantly, it gives you an extra pet. There are a lot of interesting synergy spaces in the Necrobinder's card pool, and I think maybe even more importantly than the gameplay stuff and the design stuff is that finally the Necrobinder gives us actual goth girlfriend representation, which is rare in a game. A lot of times we get lip service to the idea of a goth girlfriend. The Necrobinder is actually out there casting spells that will ruin your life. But we're really here to talk about the Regent, the star of the show, and I hate to inform you, but that is in fact one of those classic YouTuber traps where I have just inflicted a pun or play on words on you. The star of the show, the Regent, has finally arrived. The Regent is an alien. The Regent is literally from a different world. The first thing that the Regent does in the lore is crash his spaceship onto the planet that Slay the Spire 2 takes place on. This is possibly the best way to introduce a character in any form of media. More things should do this. This is fantastic. The Regent, as you can see, this dude sitting on a throne with a weird head. The throne is actively being held up by these little minion guys. It doesn't just rest on the ground. It doesn't hover via some mechanism. No, he's got these little guys that actually do all of the work, as the official description of the Regent in game notes. The Regent is essentially my chud idiot fail son that I hate, whom I love. His lore is extremely funny. Again, he literally crash landed a spaceship onto the planet, and that's how he entered the game. That is so good. For one thing, it gives us unprecedented support for the "did it hurt when you fell for heaven" style of pickup line. There is a sub-theme of a couple cards in the Regent's card pool that reference this directly. Cards like Collision Course and Crash Landing, where it is literally saying like, hey, when the Regent crashed his spaceship into the surface of this planet, it hurt this enemy. It's kind of incredible. And it isn't just from a lore and naming perspective. Like, these cards literally add debris cards, like useless debris cards into the Regent's hand. Like, it isn't just a flavor thing. Mechanically, you have to deal with the fallout of crashing your spaceship into the planet. It's incredible. Essentially, the Regent is the Tiger Woods of the Slay the Spire world. Do not trust him behind the wheel of any motor vehicle. His unique gimmick is that he has a second resource called stars. The Regent still has energy, still gains 3 energy at the start of every turn like every other character, but at the start of combat, the Regent gains 3 stars. Some cards have both an energy cost and a star cost. For example, you see Astral Pulse here. It costs 0 energy but 3 stars. Or Comet costs 0 energy but 5 stars. There are also cards that cost a non-zero amount of energy and a non-zero amount of stars. There are, as you would expect, with cards that cost stars, there are ways to gain stars, like the card Glow. Unlike energy, stars persist between turns. If you end a single battle with like 38 stars, you don't start the next combat with 38 stars. But if you end a turn with 38 stars, you will start the next turn with 38 stars. You gain 3 at the start, you gain and spend them based on the cards that are in your hand, but otherwise their number doesn't go up or down until the next combat starts. The Regent has honestly been a very hard character for people to figure out. Compared to Ironclad, Silent, Defect, they all have changes, they all have new cards, but people kind of understand those characters very well from Slay the Spire 1. Necrobinder has quite a few nuances, but it seems that people have largely gotten a handle on generally how to play the Necrobinder. The Regent has been the hardest one for many, myself included, to figure out. And I think a big part of that is that stars are weird. Nothing else in Slay the Spire works like stars. Energy refreshes every turn, use it or lose it. There is a relic called Ice Cream, which lets you persist your energy from one turn to the next, but it doesn't make it analogous because you still gain new energy every single turn. Stars don't do that. Gold and potions and relics, these are also resources that don't reset every turn, but they are more persistent than stars. Gold persists between combats, potions persist between combats until you use them, relics, you just have them forever. Unlike stars, they don't reset at the start of each combat. There's Asti Health and Orbs, those do start from the same place in each combat, but they are actually entities with game actions. Asti actually has mechanics associated with the current state of Asti. Orbs have mechanics associated with the current state of a given orb and what type of orb it is. They aren't purely resources, they are actually entities. Stars are just a resource. You just spend them to play cards. They aren't like Asti Health or Orbs. They aren't like gold or potions or relics. They aren't like energy. They are weird. Nothing works like stars. At least within Slay the Spire 2. There is something that works exactly like stars, and that's credits in the card game Netrunner. I imagine that many in the audience are asking, okay, you're telling us that there's this thing in this game Netrunner that works like stars. I don't know what Netrunner is. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about what Netrunner is and whether the Regent is playing it. Netrunner is Richard Garfield's other game. Obviously, I say that tongue-in-cheek. Richard Garfield is a legendary and very successful game designer with a career spanning decades. He designed Magic the Gathering, he designed Netrunner. He also designed many games that there's a reasonable chance you've played them, or if you haven't played them, you've at least heard of them. Games like King of Tokyo, Artifact, Keyforge. Richard Garfield has a lot of other games. Netrunner is not the other game. To me, it is Richard Garfield's other game, though, because it is my favorite card game of all time that you play in like a physical space with other physical people. It is an asymmetric two-player card game. One player plays as the corporation or the corp, and the other player plays as the hacker trying to hack into the corporation's servers, aka the runner. A lot of things differ between the two sides. Some asymmetric games are asymmetric in that each person has like their own single unique mechanic. They are fundamentally different in Netrunner. The cards that are allowed to be put into your deck and played, completely different between the sides. The deck construction rules themselves, completely different between the sides. The legal game actions that you can take are different between the two sides. One side inherently by default has hidden information. The other side inherently by default does not. The win condition is different. Both sides want 7 points, but the corporation gets 7 points by building up defenses, putting agendas behind those defenses, and spending their time and money to advance those agendas. The runner gets points by hacking into the corporation's servers, finding agendas in those servers, and stealing them. All of these things are different between the corp and the runner. All of these things provide the asymmetry in the game, but one thing that is the same between the two sides is that there are two fundamental resources. There are clicks and credits. Clicks work a lot like energy. You get an allotment at the start of the turn, you spend them that turn, they do not carry over to the next turn, instead you get your allotment the next turn. Credits work exactly like stars. You start with a certain number of them. They carry over between turns. If you spend them, you have spent them. If you gain more, you have gained more. They don't reset on your next turn. They carry over. It is probably easiest to show you the basics of Netrunner in a quick gameplay session. Also, to be very clear, I will use the term ICE multiple times when talking about Netrunner and discussing Netrunner gameplay concepts. ICE is an acronym in this case, which means Intrusion Countermeasures Electronics. Essentially, these are automated defenses, autonomous defenses that try to keep hackers from accessing part of a corporation's system. This obviously is very different from the main way that the acronym ICE is used in current events. In no way are the two the same. In no way are the two even similar. And obviously, when it comes to the political agency, ICE, fuck ICE. Here is Netrunner. We are on Chiraboga, which is a site where AI plays Netrunner against you. And we're not talking generative AI. We are talking rules and principles programmed in by a human. I am going to specifically play as the runner against the AI playing the corporation. So we're going to go with the tutorial deck just for ease of use. You'll immediately notice that there are a number of resources that I have access to. One of those is I have cards in my hand. As you can see, there's a number of them. They do things. I have a number of credits. I start the game with 5. The corp also starts the game with 5. Each of us is going to gain clicks on our turns that are tracked by the click symbol, and this just shows we have 5 cards out of 5 we are allowed to have in our hand. My hand is not that great. Yeah, I'm gonna mulligan this. That's a much better starting hand. So, the corporation is playing 3 cards on their turn. So, as you saw there, the corporation gained 3 clicks and had a mandatory draw at the start of their turn, then took 3 actions, 1 per click. They put down 2 defenses, which are called ice, in front of HQ, which is their hand, R&D, which is their deck. There is a 3rd central server, which is archives, their discard pile. They have nothing in their discard pile right now, so that's not a very meaningful server at the moment. As the runner, one of my goals is to try to get into these servers. So, like, I want to access HQ and look at cards that are in the corp's hand. I also want to get into R&D and see the top card of the corp's deck. There are also remote servers, so the corp installed a card in a remote server here. My turn has started. I have 5 credits, which is what I start the game with. I have 4 clicks, which is what I start each turn with. I have 4 clicks to spend on this turn. Next turn will start with 4 clicks, just like this turn did. I'm going to start off by playing the card Sure Gamble. This should remind you of a card in Slay the Spire called Royal Gamble. The cost 5 is very intentional here. I start off with 5 credits. It costs 5 credits to play. So let's go ahead and play Sure Gamble. I'm now at 9 credits. I want to know what's going on central servers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the card Red Team. So I'm going to use Red Team to try to get into R&D. I'm about to start a process called making a run. Runs are really the core of how Netrunner works. A run is an attempt to break into this server. So in this case, I'm going to try to break into R&D. Now, the corporation has a defense on R&D called Ice. This Ice could potentially do some nasty stuff to me, but right now, it's not doing anything because it is face down. The corporation has to spend money to turn it face up and make it active. If they don't do that, then I get to just pass directly over this ice and I get to make a successful run and see what's on top of R&D. So let's see if that happens. No. So they have rezzed Diviner. I don't have the ability to interact with Diviner because I don't have something called an icebreaker on the field. So this subroutine, the little thing after the arrow, happens. In this case, Diviner dealt me 1 damage. Damage basically just hits a random card from my hand. They hit the card Unity, and since Unity costs an odd number, that ends the run. End the run just means I don't get to continue. Nothing else happens to me. But that does mean I didn't make a successful run on R&D, and I'm actually going to just play Creative Commission to gain more money. And that's the end of my turn. Now it is the corp's turn. Oh no, they had a Nico campaign. Dang. Okay, so an eco campaign is an asset. That's a thing that the corp can put out. In this case, an eco campaign has an ability that's active when the turn starts. Since it's rezzed, i.e. active, the corp gets to do that thing. In this case, they get to take money off of it. Okay, the corp has 5 credits. I want them to not have 5 credits. I'm going to start by drawing. Okay, that's a good thing to do with my last click. So I'm going to make a run. I'm going to run this Nico campaign. There are no defenses here, so nothing is going to stop me from getting there. So I'm going to continue. I access the Nico campaign, and I'm going to pay 2 credits, which is the trash cost and the trash can symbol, to trash it. That means the corp does not have access to what Nico campaign does anymore, essentially. I still have 6 credits, so I'm going to make a run on this remote and see what it is. I will continue. It is another Nico campaign. I'm going to trash that as well. Corp having access to Nico campaign is good for them, and I'm going to play a Creative Commission and end my turn. The same thing is happening each turn. A lot like energy, we gain these clicks each turn. They are ephemeral. They do not carry over turn to turn. The credits, however, you noticed I ended the last turn on 8 credits. I start the turn on 8 credits now. I still don't have a way to deal with this Diviner, so I'm going to draw some more cards. I'll draw once more. And let's see what's on HQ. It is a Palisade. That just says end the run. Corporation takes a turn. Now, the corporation has thrown what certainly looks like an agenda in their remote server. I want to make a run to get this out of there, to get whatever this thing is. So let's do that. Let's play a Mayfly. So Mayfly is a program. I paid the 1 credit install cost, and it's going to sit on my board until I use it. Mayfly specifically has text that says when I use it, I trash it. That's not true of most programs. Most of them sit around like a power and Slay the Spire would. But let's go ahead and make a run on the remote. The corp chose not to res the ice, so I will continue, and I will access. And this is what is called an agenda. It's worth 1 point. These are the cards that I need to steal to win the game, and the corp needs to advance and score to win the game. I will steal that. And really, with the Regent, if you look close enough, it is Netrunners all the way down. The parallels and illusions are extremely intentional. These are not accidental. They are not me reading into something that is not there. They are put there by the dev team very intentionally. Royal Gamble is a direct analog, both mechanically and visually, to maybe the most iconic Netrunner card of all time, Sure Gamble. Royal Gamble and Sure Gamble both cost 5 and give you 9. They both have art that looks like this. Royal Gamble is about as close of a one-to-one comparison artistically as you can possibly get to the art of Sure Gamble. In addition, one of the co-founders of Megacrit, one of the creators of Slay the Spire, Anthony Giovannetti himself, was a major force in the early competitive community in Netrunner. He created stimhack.com, which was a combination of a news site about happenings in the competitive scene, what decks had won tournaments, foundational writing, kind of the Netrunner equivalent of the What's the Beat Down article from Magic, and also forums where people could gather to talk specifically about the competitive scene in Netrunner. Anthony was the one who built that. Notably, the card offering is an allusion to a Netrunner card, Stimhack. Both of them, you get a huge benefit. In Netrunner terms, it's you get a bunch of credits while you're making a run. In Slay the Spire terms, it's gain energy and draw cards. And to get that large benefit, you have to pay a permanent cost. In Stimhack, that is, you take a core damage, which is permanent drain on your ability to hold cards in your hand. In offering, you are literally sacrificing your own HP, your own vital essence. But these are very, very intentional parallels. The lore goes even deeper. Anthony Giovannetti, in the Netrunner scene, was known as Sneaky Sly. That was the username that he went by, posting on stimhack.com. Sneaky and Sly, notably, going on to be 2 of the main words associated with the discard mechanics in Slay the Spire. I wonder if Anthony potentially likes the discard mechanics. Also, it is impossible to ignore the existence of both the Gauntlet and the Boot. The Boot is a relic in Slay the Spire 1, which is bad. This is almost certainly a reference to the Netrunner card, the Gauntlet, which is bad. But all of this brings up the question, what do stars represent? What are stars, actually? Mechanically, we've talked about they work like credits. Sure. Okay. But that's a mechanic. What do they actually represent in the game world of Slay the Spire? What object in Slay the Spire do stars represent? Gold, it's very obvious. They represent pieces of gold, whatever currency is used in the Spire itself. You have literal pieces of currency that you're carrying around that you literally hand over to a merchant to get stuff. The relics represent what the relic is. When you get the relic Snecko Skull, I think it implies that you are carrying around a Snecko Skull for the rest of the run. What is a star? To answer that question, I think we need to start with how stars are used. And the short answer is they are generally used on effects that are stellar or cosmic in some way. For instance, the cards Falling Star, Gamma Blast, very obviously stellar. You have like a falling star, you have gamma radiation, which is produced by stars. Ideas of the stars aligning with the card alignment, a stellar phenomenon like a black hole interacting with the stars. You compare that to the rest of the Regent's card pool. Refined Blade, like that's very obviously like a smith smithing activity which interacts with the Sovereign Blade. As we talked about, collision course represents crashing your spaceship into the planet, which is, I guess, related to stars, but not in the sense that you would probably want it to be. Cards that represent getting the minions to do something, like essentially this is the capitalist maxing portion of the Regent's card pool where you exploit your free labor. And then there's also just cards that kind of reference kingly nature, your ego, really, the force of pure self-described aura. I don't know if anyone else is describing the Regent as kingly, but the Regent certainly is describing himself to himself as kingly, and there is power in that. We see a similar story when it comes to how stars are created in the game. Usually these are stellar or cosmic effects. It's not just a strike, it's a strike that is solar in some sense and that creates some amount of star power. Creating new stars gives you new star energy, a hidden cache of energy that visually is very star-like. What is more stellar than the Big Bang itself? Creating a new thing out of nowhere gives you star energy. This certainly gives us a compelling argument that stars represent some sort of stellar or cosmic power or energy that for some reason the Regent is able to wield and manipulate. But there is one fly in this ointment, and we've actually already talked about it before. We have to consider gambling. In particular, we have to consider Royal Gamble. Royal Gamble does not depict a cosmic or stellar energy in the way that the other cosmic or stellar energy cards do. It depicts gambling. In Netrunner, Sure Gamble represents actual gambling. Like, you are sitting down at a table to gamble. You have a quantum manipulation ring, which means that you know you're going to win the gamble. You get real money and you walk away from the table. Sure Gamble represents literally gambling. Literally, you are sitting down to a game of cards and winning money from it. That is what Sure Gamble represents. What does the card Royal Gamble represent? If you try to say that it represents the exact same thing, that the Regent sitting down to a gambling match against someone or something and winning a prize of stellar energy, how does that work? Who is gambling with the Regent? Why are his opponents who are trying to kill him in real life pausing their life and death struggle to be like, oh yeah, hell yeah, I'll do some Texas Hold'em with you, buddy? Like, that does not make any sense. Like, who is gambling with the Regent? Maybe more importantly, whoever is gambling with the Regent, why do they have stars? There were no stars in Slay the Spire 1. There are no stars that you get from enemies when you're playing as any other character in Slay the Spire 2. It doesn't make sense that they just randomly have this star energy that they're able and willing to stake on some weird poker match that possibly uses cards that they've never seen before and rules they've never seen before because they come from a different planet. It really does not make sense that the Regent is able to gamble in the first place and able to win stars from gambling in the second place. There are even simpler logistical problems with the Royal Gamble is actual gambling theory, such as, how does an enemy like the Leaf Slime hold the cards? Is the Doormaker's vision really this good? There's no way. My contention is that you cannot say the card Royal Gamble depicts the Regent actually gambling with someone. I think that Royal Gamble very clearly depicts the Regent playing and or cosplaying the Netrunner card Sure Gamble, which implies that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner. The implications of Royal Gamble are very profound. Playing a Netrunner card for the purposes of gaining resources in the card game Netrunner somehow translates to real-world combat benefits for the Regent. That is kind of wild. I don't know about you, but whenever I'm in a boxing match, I don't take a pause to make a move in a game of chess I have going on the side. That does not give me a benefit in a real-world combat situation, but for the Regent, apparently it does. This is essentially equivalent to the scenario. Imagine that you are an expert martial artist, or I guess if you already are an expert martial artist, then don't imagine it, you just are. Good for you. You are getting attacked by someone. You're in the middle of a fight. I don't know why the fight started. I don't know your life. life, but you are. However, you are an expert martial artist, so you are beating this guy. His attacks are not landing, you are dodging all of them, you are firing back with extreme force. This fight is essentially over. But before you can land the finishing blow, this guy pulls out the fucking dual disc system from Yu-Gi-Oh!, slaps a Blue Eyes White Dragon into play in attack mode, and starts putting belt to ass. Like, you end up in the fucking hospital because this guy played a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. That's basically what the Regent is doing. It is extremely overpowered, and I don't know why anyone in the Spire puts up with it. This suggests to me that the Regent has some sort of insanity superpower, some sort of clap your hands and believe superpower. He's actually sort of a reality warper, but because of limits of the way that he understands the world, it manifests as, oh, when I play Netrunner cards, I get some sort of Netrunner related power, and that turns into a real world benefit. It's very reminiscent of in Chainsaw Man Part 2, where Asa is able to turn the aquarium into a spear when she absolutely just 100% does not have enough money to buy the aquarium, but she believes that she does, and therefore she's able to turn the aquarium into a spear. It's sort of like that. Playing a Netrunner card absolutely does not give you the power to punch someone harder in the face, but the Regent believes that it gives him the power to punch them harder in the face, and therefore it happens. This is very strong. Maybe less important and less strong, but I do think that there is another clear implication of the fact that Royal Gamble is literally playing a Netrunner card, and it is that the Regent has likely eaten soy beef. This is shockingly consistent with the Slay the Spire 2 lore. This theory, I know that this is a bit off the wall in terms of theories. I know that probably no one else is spouting this theory of the Regent is literally playing Netrunner in the context of a Slay the Spire 2 run. I don't know how many people are saying that. If a lot of people are saying that, then I'm happy to be late to the theory because I think it's correct. Despite the fact that the theory is very off the wall, it is shockingly consistent with the lore. For instance, if stars are so powerful, why do no enemies steal them? There are enemies who interfere with the cards in the deck. Cards in the deck are inherently powerful in the world because they represent some sort of technique or some sort of move that the character is able to use, and the Queen is able to bind some of your techniques and moves, or the Fog Cloud is able to restrict you from using multiple in a turn, or the Doormaker is able to enchant them such that whenever you use some of your techniques, you forget them for the rest of the fight because they have exhausted. There's even an enemy in Act 2 that steals a card from your deck, reaches out, grabs it from your deck, and says, I'm gonna run off in 4 turns and I'm gonna take this card with me. Why does nothing in the game do that with stars? Enemies steal your stats like strength and dexterity, enemies steal your cards, enemies steal your health, enemies steal your energy. Why does nothing steal stars? I think the answer is very clear, because the stars inherently are not valuable. The stars are only valuable in as much as they make the Regent believe that he has more power. Why are stars purely a resource, not an entity with game actions or attributes? Again, it's because the stars are not actually this like cosmic power. They are not actually this thing with its own inherent power. You would think if stars were truly cosmic energy, that they would be some sort of in-game entity that has its own action surrounding it. If they are credits in the game Netrunner, then yeah, of course they don't do anything. They're little cardboard tokens. They just like sit on a mat representing that you have 9 of them. Why does the merchant not accept stars? This is one of the most interesting questions. If stars truly were valuable, if they truly had some sort of inherent value, why does the merchant not take them? Like, they even represent money. Credits literally represent money in the world of Netrunner. Why would the merchant not accept something that is equal to money? The merchant is very good at taking your money. And I think the answer is, again, very clear. It's because the stars themselves are not actually inherently valuable. This would be like going to a pawn shop and saying, hey, I can give you 100 little cardboard tokens with a 1 on them for that diamond ring. They would laugh you out of the store. I bet that that's a conversation that literally happens at some point in the story of Slay the Spire 2. We just haven't seen it yet. In addition, something, and this is secondary, it is less important than the rest of stuff. It is another food-related implication of kind of the lore here. Much like in the card Student Loans, strawberries in the Spire do in fact increase max health. That is canon. We have a lot of questions to ask and answer in light of this revelation. If the Regent is literally playing Netrunner, how does that work? After all, Slay the Spire is not exactly the same as a game of Netrunner. Hopefully you picked up on that from the 2 gameplay sequences that you saw earlier, but if you didn't, I think a dead giveaway is that Netrunner World Championships happen every single year, and they are decided by people playing Netrunner, not by people playing Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is missing a lot of aspects of the gameplay in Netrunner. There are at least immediately not any clear analogs for servers or assets or agendas or ice. To really understand what's going on here, I think we have to examine the gameplay of Slay the Spire to figure out where and how the Regent is playing Netrunner. The first observation is that the Regent is clearly playing Netrunner as the runner and not as the corporation. One clear tip-off is narrative. The Spire is clearly the corporation because it is the large, faceless entity that is trying to keep intruders out. That is the narrative role of the corporation in any game of Netrunner. The Regent, by contrast, is the ragtag weirdo who is taking on the Spire, trying to get to the heart of its secrets. Also, I guess, narratively speaking, the Spire is a big, tall thing that rises from the earth into the heavens. One of the core aspects of the world building in Netrunner is the Beanstalk, which is a space elevator. Like, it is literally a spire rising from the equator up into the heavens, taking you into orbit very easily. Literally, there is a spire to infiltrate and potentially slay in the world of Netrunner, and it is controlled by the biggest corporation in the world of Netrunner, Wayland. There's also gameplay that clearly points out that the Regent is playing as runner and not as corp. The Spire is the one that plays autonomous defenses, very analogous to ice. If the Regent takes lethal damage, that is much like the runner taking lethal damage in that the Spire instantly wins. In addition, the Spire does not win if the Regent runs out of cards. In a game of Netrunner, if the runner runs out of cards, then okay, fine. Like, they don't have cards anymore, they can keep playing the game and they can keep winning. However, if the corp runs out of cards to draw, then the runner instantly wins. So the fact that you get to reshuffle your deck and keep playing is a clear sign that the Spire is the corporation and the Regent is the runner. There's also the fact that at all possible points in time, no matter what cards you add to your deck, the Regent is breaking all deck building rules for the corporation in a gigantic, fundamental, massive way that cannot possibly be repaired. If the Regent is playing corporation, the Regent is cheating absolutely hand over fist. This is a little more conceptual and a little less of a slam dunk, but the Regent wins by what I would call scoring 3, beating 3 bosses, the Act 1 boss, the Act 2 boss, the Act 3 boss. In Netrunner, this is not a hard and fast rule. There are many games where this will not exactly be the case, but the prototypical way that a runner wins a game of Netrunner is by stealing 3 agendas. So we do have to ask the question, if the Regent is playing Netrunner, then what does a game of Netrunner correspond to? There's one theory, which is the entire run, from the point that you hit begin run to the point that you either die or slay the final Act 3 boss in the Spire. That is a single game of Netrunner. All of the actions you take in the entire run are analogous to one single game of Netrunner. That means that the paths through the act are sort of analogous to the servers that the corporation sets up. The combats and events represent ice, upgrades, things like that. Campfires and shops, I guess they represent the runner taking clicks or turns off of running, maybe? There are some pros of this theory. I think the biggest pro is that the win conditions line up very clearly. As we talked about, there's scoring 3. Also, elites and combats are very reminiscent of how ice works, like this idea of there's this autonomous defense. You have to use the tools that you have to get past that autonomous defense without them ending your run. That lines up very nicely. But there are a lot of cons with this theory. There are a lot of downsides. The scales really don't line up at all. The idea of the entire run of Slay the Spire is equal to a single game of Netrunner suggests a game that ends in around 3 runs. If you say that the campfires and shops and events are the runner taking clicks off, then it's like a couple turns. It's potentially less than 1 turn, probably at most 4 turns. That's very, very short. Games of Netrunner can be that short, but typically they are not that short. Also, there's something really, really, really weird if an individual elite or combat is equal to an individual ice, and that is that credits restart to the starting place every single time the runner encounters an ice. That is not at all how Netrunner works. There's like one identity in the game that kind of does that, called Nasir, but it doesn't work the way that things do in Slay the Spire. This is, I think, a gaping weakness. Like, this essentially is irreconcilable. The entire run of Slay the Spire can't be equal to a game of Netrunner for this reason alone. What if each act is a game of Netrunner? In that case, winning the game would be analogous to defeating the act boss. The scale lines up better with a typical game of Netrunner. There's like somewhere in the order of 10 to 12 turns in a given act, each floor representing a turn. That scale lines up a lot better with the length of a typical game of Netrunner. Elites and combats can still like represent ice potentially. This theory is a little bit better than the previous theory, but really only a little. There are a ton of downsides. And the problem really is the same as last time, just in some ways intensified, and that is the macro and micro scales still don't line up well. If we take the interpretation of individual combats, individual elites are like ice, they represent an individual autonomous defense that the runner hits during a single run, then actually we have the same problem we had in the previous case, just intensified, because the game is even shorter, has even less interaction and even less interplay. And also we have an additional added problem of the meta-scaling between acts. You don't start off the quote-unquote game in Act 2 in the same place you start off the game in Act 1. There's sort of a pandemic legacy problem that would need to be addressed. We're talking a game could literally end in a single run, which, with a few weird off-the-wall, oddball exceptions, is impossible to do in a game of Netrunner. Realistically, you need at least 3. If we zoom the opposite direction, where we say, okay, each floor is a turn, that lines up a little bit better, but it still doesn't line up well because we still have the issue that credits reset at the start of every single turn. That is not when credits reset in a game of Netrunner. They reset at the start of a game, not at the start of a turn. If we treat the entire act as a game of Netrunner, we run into problems no matter which way we try to fit that on. There is no Goldilocks solution here. We can't simply say, oh, we'll find the middle ground between these two approaches and it'll work perfectly in this framework. There really isn't a way to find a middle ground. You have to take one interpretation or the other, and neither of them works well. Every combat is a game of Netrunner. Every combat, every elite, every boss represents a game of Netrunner. In this theory, the macro and micro scales actually line up very neatly. The credits, the exhausts, all of the things like that, they restart every game. You start with your starting deck, you start with your starting credit pool every single combat. Energy now makes perfect sense in terms of how clicks work. Like clicks, you gain energy every turn, you use it, and then the turn ends, the energy goes away, and you gain your allotment of energy/clicks at the start of each turn. That lines up perfectly. Events, shops, campfires in this view would represent things that the Regent does other than playing Netrunner. Literally going to an event, literally going to a shop, literally going to a campfire. From an immersion sense alone, this makes a lot of sense. There are still a few cons to this theory. The biggest one is that it's no longer as clear what the analog to making a run represents. Runs really are the core of the game in Netrunner, so it is kind of a big problem to not have a good answer to, okay, then what does it mean when you make a run? The best I can come up with is making a run in Netrunner is basically an attempt to weaken the corporation. You are trying to defeat their defenses, you are trying to deal them damage or make them weaker in some way. So, the clear answer is that the analog of making a run in Netrunner is that the Regent deals damage and or debuffs the enemy in Slay the Spire. If the Regent is playing Slay the Spire, I think a natural question to ask is which Netrunner cards are in the Regent's deck? Solar Strike is a pretty clear analog of Dirty Laundry. It's not perfect, you don't have the exact 2 credits to gain 5 credits thing here, but the same idea clearly applies. You're making a run, i.e. dealing damage. It is successful, so you gain some amount of credits back. You gain a star. There's also Genesis, which is very similar to Data Folding or Rizeki or cards like that, where you have some sort of upfront cost, but then at the start of your turn, you gain credits. There's also Glow, which is very similar to Build Script. Glow gains you some stars and draws you some cards. Build Script gains you a credit and draws you some cards. There's Heavenly Drill, which represents putting all of your energy in a single turn into one big attack. That's very similar to Wanton Destruction, where you put all of your clicks into a single run to do as much damage to the corp as possible. There's also Stardust, which is a similar concept but for credits or stars. Stardust, you put all of your stars into a single attack to do as much damage to the enemy as possible. Vamp, you put all of your credits into a single run to do as much damage to the corporation as possible. 7 stars represents a card like Deep Dive. You're spending a large amount of energy, you're spending a large amount of credits, but you're getting a huge benefit from it. Deep Dive is one of a series of cards that are quests, I guess you could say, where you have to spend a bunch of clicks running each of the central servers and you have to spend money getting through those central servers. But then after you've done that, you can play the card and get a huge benefit. This one is maybe a bit more out there, but I think that the card Neutron Aegis is very reminiscent of the card Sacrificial Clone. In both cases, you essentially spend all of your money. Neutron Aegis, technically you only spend 5 stars, but it's pretty rare unless you have a really strong star generation build that you have more than 5 just lying around. In Sacrificial Clone, you literally have to spend all of your credits. You lose all of the credits in your credit pool. You lose kind of all of your installed resources. But in both cases, it keeps you from dying. 8 plating is a ton of free block, and Sacrificial Clone literally just says, like, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. These are very spiritually similar cards. There's also Child of the Stars, which is very spiritually similar to Guru Devinder or Icebreakers. You get a protection from a bad effect by spending stars. In the case of Icebreakers, that's okay, like you've got ice, which are going to do bad things to you, but you can pay money if you have them installed to get around those effects happening. There's also Alignment, which is very similar to Biotic Labor. Pay some money, gain some energy, pay some money, gain some clicks. The lore lines up, the gameplay lines up, the cards line up. The Regent is literally playing Netrunner. It's hard to argue otherwise at this point. That leads us to a very important question. How should we feel about the fact that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner during a run of Slay the Spire? I have divided this into 2 sub-questions. The first one, is it funny that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner? Yes. It is actually extremely funny that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner. Like, are you kidding me? You've got the Insatiable out here who's literally trying to eat you in real life, and you're like, I summon my blue eyes white dragon. Like that is funny. That is extremely funny. That is essentially the Calvin Ball philosophy. Like, I don't care what you're doing. I'm playing by my own rules over here and I'm having a great time. It is very, very funny that this is like the tactic that is most effective for the Regent to win a run of Slay the Spire, keep from actually dying in real life, is to play Calvin Ball with Netrunner cards. Like, that's amazing. 10 out of 10. The lore is incredible. The second sub-question is it a little sad that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner? And I would say yes, it is definitely a little sad that the Regent is literally playing Netrunner. The Regent is the heir to some sort of throne. The Regent is a grown-ass man, and he's kind of sitting around here like, I play my blue eyes white dragon. Like, that's a little sad. If a 35-year-old man is still playing Calvin Ball every day with his stuffed tiger, props for the amount of whimsy and wonder that you still have in your life, but it is a little bit sad. We just have to admit that. It is a little bit sad. Now, on to maybe the most important question of the day. We have established that the Regent is playing Netrunner. Is the Regent good at it? There is a huge elephant in the room, or nibbit in the room in this case, which is you. Yes, you, I do mean you specifically. Is the Regent good at Netrunner is not solely dependent on the Regent, because the Regent's actions are not solely dependent on the Regent. You, yes, you, control what the Regent does during a run. The Regent could die on floor 1 every single time that you play a run of Slay the Spire through no fault of his own, because you take very, very poor game actions. The Regent would certainly not look like someone who's good at Netrunner if you do that. However, this is a cop-out of an answer, and it's really a non-sufficient answer. Factually, it is not the full scenario. No matter what you do as the player, there are certain restrictions and quirks to how the Regent operates, which indicates something about the Regent's player skill. And it is completely independent of the actions that you take as the player. As a result of this, I am going to basically hold this as a completely orthogonal point. I'm just going to assume that you, the player, are good at Slay the Spire for the remainder of the discussion. That's the only way to really analyze this in a way that's interesting. So congratulations, you are officially good at Slay the Spire, at least as long as you are watching this video. Things still don't line up completely. We've found the scale that the Netrunner is taking place at, like a single Netrunner game is analogous to a single combat in Slay the Spire, but things still don't line up perfectly in that framework. There are still some discrepancies that we have to account for. For instance, in a game of Netrunner, you start with 5 credits. In a game of Netrunner within Slay the Spire, the Regent starts with 3 stars. This is not simply a case of 3 stars represents 5 credits. Again, we have the card Royal Gamble. That card is Sure Gamble. It costs 5. That means that 1 credit equals 1 star. Why is the Regent starting with 3 credits? Is it just like, is the Regent too OP? Did we have to nerf the Regent by starting with 3 credits? Also, there's the question of 3 clicks per turn. You start off with 3 energy in Slay the Spire, and you have to get relics or get cards to go up to 4 energy per turn. That's very strange because the runner, which we've established the Regent is playing as the runner gets 4 clicks per turn. So why does the Regent only have 3? There's also the fact that the Regent never really seems to play hardware or icebreakers. That's very strange. Hardware and icebreakers are extremely important parts of the runner's rig in Netrunner, so if the Regent is playing Netrunner, it's very weird that we never see the hardware or icebreakers come out. There's also the fact that alignment is a very clear analog of the card Biotic Labor. In a runner deck, there's a corp card in a runner deck. That's really weird. Definitely against the rules. There's also the fact that the runner takes the first turn. In a game of Netrunner, the corporation takes the first turn, very intentionally by design. If the corp didn't get to take the first turn and the runner got to take the first turn, the runner could literally just steal agendas out of the corporation's deck with no chance to put defenses in front of them, and the game would just be over before it started. The corporation needs to have the first turn to prevent absolutely no interaction losses. In addition, the runner knows the corp's hidden information in Slay the Spire. You have the intents. You know that the enemy is about to attack you for 8 damage and debuff you, or you know that the enemy is about to put specifically 3 status cards in your deck, or you know that the enemy is about to use a negative enchantment on your cards, or you know that the enemy is about to buff itself. Why does the runner know the corp's hidden information? That is also very, very strange and a big discrepancy from the normal game of Netrunner. Probably the biggest single discrepancy between Netrunner and Slay the Spire is that in Netrunner, you draw 5 cards at the start of the game, and then you draw a card whenever you have an effect that lets you draw a card. You don't draw 5 every single turn. You also don't discard your entire hand every single turn. The fact that the Regent discards the entire hand and draws 5 every single turn is wildly out of line with how Netrunner works. And just as big, when the deck is out in Netrunner, it's just out. The game just continues. When the deck is out in a game of Netrunner within Slay the Spire, the Regent reshuffles it. That's so weird. That is not at all how Netrunner works. This is such a massive discrepancy that there is literally a restricted card in the history of Netrunner that did that effect. That is such a powerful effect, and the Regent just gets to do it for free. Also, actually, maybe the ones that I just gave weren't the biggest discrepancies, because in a game of Netrunner that takes place in Slay the Spire that the Regent is playing, the Regent literally stabs his in real life opponent with a sword. That is not a thing that happens in Netrunner. If you have been looking at this analog and you've thought, man, Netrunner looks like a cool game, but I don't want to go to my local meetup because I don't want to get stabbed, you don't have to worry about that. People don't do that in Netrunner. That is unique to the Regent, and it is deeply weird. The Regent is playing Netrunner. We've established that. We agree about that. But I think we also have to agree that the Regent is playing Netrunner very strangely. Some of these discrepancies are less real than the others. Some of these are not actually discrepancies when you look closer at them. For instance, there are some cards that have unusual effects. A good example here is, as we talked about, Alignment, which is very similar to Biotic Labor, which is a corp card. Well, Netrunner is a living card game. New sets come out, new cards come out. Presumably, the Regent has cards that have that effect. They're just from a set that we don't have here on Earth yet. I have to be honest that I'm not a huge fan of the design direction that the people making Netrunner on whatever planet the Regent comes from have gone. Like, the fact that they've printed cards in Netrunner that let you stab your opponent in real life with a sword is pretty nettlesome design space. I don't know why they went in that direction. I can't see many positives in terms of game design. It just feels like that's going to discourage people from playing the game, which admittedly does kind of fit with the lore in Slay the Spire 2. In Slay the Spire 2, the Regent leaves his home planet because everyone's boring. It's implied that that's like, oh, he was bored of a perfect utopian society because there's something wrong with him. But maybe what that actually meant is that the Regent was tired of people not playing his favorite game with him and wanted to find a planet where they would. There's also the question of whether the Regent plays hardware or programs. He definitely does. He absolutely does. As we've talked about, the powers are very analogous to hardware and programs. The Sovereign Blade is an installed thing that sits around and interacts with the defenses of the Spire. That is a program. There's things that let you forge. There are other powers. Like, absolutely, the Regent is playing hardware and programs over the course of a run, over the course of an individual battle. The Regent is sitting on a big ol' throne. Like, that's the Throne of Stars is the Regent's console in some way. It's actually incorrect to say that the Regent never plays hardware or programs. He absolutely does. There's also the question of whether the runner takes the first turn. I would argue that the runner does not take the first turn. If you actually look at what the Corp's first turn is in Netrunner, it is setting up defenses, laying groundwork for future interactions. There are basically no ways in the game of Netrunner for the Corp to directly damage the runner before they have a chance to take a turn. There are cards like Neural EMP or cards like Scorched Earth, which relies on cards like Sea Source. The runner has to interact with the Corp before the Corp can damage them directly. It would not make any sense if we are playing Netrunner for the enemies in Slay the Spire to be able to damage the Regent before he has a chance to take his first turn. It's actually very analogous to Netrunner, where basically, like, we can think of their first turn is they are setting up I attack for 8 and debuff you, and then the next turn that resolves. The runner's not taking damage before the runner has a chance to do anything, which ultimately means that the Corp is actually taking the first turn in Netrunner in Slay the Spire. One of the particular non-discrepancies that I want to talk about briefly is the question of hidden information, because I think it's particularly revealing for the question that's at the heart of this video. In Netrunner, the Corp's board is face down by default. It is hidden information by default. Technically speaking, when the Corp plays an ice, the runner does not know if it's going to attack him for 8 or it's going to attack him for 32. However, in Slay the Spire, enemy intents are public information. The Regent knows what the enemy is about to do every single turn, and therefore can play block cards on turns where block is desirable, but avoid playing them on turns where the enemy is buffing itself, for instance, and not attacking. It's also not just the Regent who knows what enemy intents are. The Ironclad knows what they are, the Silent knows what they are, the Necrobinder knows what they are, the Defect knows what they are, all very different people with very different backgrounds, very different skill sets, but all of them know what the enemy intent is. Does that mean that the Regent is cheating? I would say no. Corp information is really only as hidden as it can be, even in the game of Netrunner. If the Corp plays an ice, you know it's an ice because no other card can possibly be in that location. If they play a second card in a remote server, you know that one of those two at least has to be an upgrade because 2 assets or an asset and an agenda, or two agendas can't be in the same server at the same time. There are aspects of corp information that are not truly hidden, and even if we are talking about truly hidden information, like which ice did I just play, which agenda did I just play, which upgrade did I just play, within a given ID or archetype, a lot of cards will be pretty standard and therefore pretty guessable. I myself, not to toot my own horn, I've never been a great Netrunner player. I've been a decent Netrunner player, a pretty good one at my peak. Even I could do that. Even I, playing against an Asmari list, would kind of just know, oh, they put that ice on R&D. It's one of three things. Given the phase in the game and the amount of money they have right now, it's probably this one. If the Regent is reasonably good at all at fighting, the Regent probably has a really good sense of what the hidden information is. If anything, this actually suggests the Regent is good at Netrunner because he's never wrong. The Regent never thinks that the enemy's about to attack him for 30, and then it turns out the enemy isn't attacking him at all. None of those mistakes happen. The Regent is very good at reading intents. So that solves the things that are very clearly not discrepancies. Now we have to move to the ones that are still seemingly discrepancies based on what we know. In particular, weirdness with clicks, credits, and card draw. In a normal game of Netrunner that you could play at your local card shop today, you start with 5 credits and you start with 5 cards. You get 4 clicks per turn as the runner. Cards retain between turns. You don't draw free cards each turn as the runner. Your deck is 40 plus cards. When your deck runs out, it's tough beans. As the Regent, you start with 3 credits and 5 cards. You get 3 clicks per turn. Cards discard at the end of the turn, and you draw 5 new cards each turn. Your deck starts at 10 cards, but can grow from there. Sometimes it'll get up to 30 cards, but typically you're not getting above 40 unless something exceptional happens. And when your deck runs out, you reshuffle. This is a lot of weirdness. These are a lot of discrepancies. If we are just looking at this, I think a natural question is the Regent cheating at Netrunner? And it's definitely tempting to say yes, because it certainly seems like the Regent is cheating at Netrunner. And in fact, the answer is yes. But the thing is, that's normal. Every deck gets to cheat at Netrunner in some way because they have an identity. You see an example of an identity over here, Andromeda. Normally, you get to draw a starting hand of 5 cards in Netrunner. When you're playing as Andy, you get to draw a starting hand of 9 cards. That is basically a built-in way to cheat at Netrunner. Identities are deck-defining and strategy-defining because of their unique way of cheating at the game. A lot of the discrepancies that we see between how the Regent plays a game of Netrunner and how I or you would play a game of Netrunner today could be explained by the identity that the Regent is playing as. The text on the Regent's identity would look something like, start the game with 3 credits. At the start of your turn, lose 1 click and draw 5 cards. At the end of your turn, discard your hand. If you would draw a card while your stack is empty, reshuffle your discard pile before drawing. The point here is you can devise an identity that explains all of the Regent's weird play quirks. Now, let's compare that to what some identities in the actual game of Netrunner do. Most identities in Netrunner do something along the lines of give you an extra credit or card per turn, give you an extra click per turn that's put towards a specific type of activity. When you take an action, you get to do a negative effect to the corp, but the action is somewhat hard to come by. Some of them will potentially give you the ability to interfere with the corp's defenses, but only when a certain event triggers, which isn't super often. The ID ability is meaningful, but it isn't game-breaking in most cases. And if it is game-breaking, then that is a balance problem, and the ID is almost certainly about to get banned. When we look at the text on the ID that the Regent is playing, we have to agree it is insanely busted. If this identity were in the game, no one would play any other identity for the entirety of the time that it was legal. Drawing 5 cards a turn is insane. That is 5 free clicks every single turn. And that's without even considering the additional utility of having infinite free Levy AR lab accesses. This would be the strongest ID ever printed. It would be the strongest card ever printed in the entire history of of the game of Netrunner. Yet another reason I kind of have to give a vote of no confidence to whatever design council is designing cards on the planet the Regent is from. The sword cards are bad enough, but this is like really a design problem. Which actually does bring us to another entity in the room. The Cubex construct in the room is, of course, deck building. Skill at piloting in the game is not the only skill that is tested when you play Netrunner. You also have to be good at deck building. You have to be able to build a coherent and good deck in the first place. Is the Regent good at deck building? One thing I notice is that there's a pretty limited pool of cards that are available to add to your deck in the first place when you're playing as the Regent. It is possible that's because we're playing in some sort of limited card pool format. It's possible, however, that this is a self-imposed restriction. Maybe the Regent only likes certain cards, and that's why those are the only ones you can put in your deck. It's very possible that on the planet the Regent is from, Netrunner is a TCG, and therefore the Regent only has certain cards, like hasn't opened up enough booster boxes to get all of the chase rares. Actually, this kind of makes sense with ancient card rewards. There are certain cards that you can only get by meeting specific ancients. It could just be that the ancients have bought all of the chase mythic rares, the Regent hasn't. And so when you encounter those agents, they're like, oh my god, dude, this really, like, your deck sucks, man. Do you want this? Like, are you okay out there? Which kind of does fit with the overall theming and lore of the Regent. So that's actually kind of a compelling theory. There's also the fact that not all of the cards you can theoretically get are available in a given run of Slay the Spire. There are possible in-lore reasons for this. Maybe the Regent had all of those cards. They got lost when the ship crashed. The card holder was like on the outer verges and just like all the cards scattered across the planet, and so the Regent is only like finding them as he ascends the spire, and you're only able to actually get your rares as you get farther up the spire, and that's why you don't start with them. It could also just be that the Regent is too lazy to dig up those cards. I know that that sounds like a bogus theory, but this is a genuine limiting factor in me building a new deck in Netrunner, is like, do I really want to pull out my sleeve of cards and dig through them to find that specific agenda that, like, I don't know where it is because it's never been good until this deck. So like, maybe it's in my pool of active cards, maybe it's in the binder, maybe it's in the closet. This is a genuine theory is my point, and it would mean that the Regent is worse at Netrunner if it is true. It is worth noting that in Netrunner tournaments, it's legal to proxy cards, so being too lazy to find your cards is not actually a good excuse if that is the case. Tezcatara could proxy them for the Regent, like Tezcatara proxies relics. Certainly Tezcatara can proxy some playing cards. If it is a matter of laziness, that is entirely on the Regent. Like, the Regent is limiting himself in terms of how good he is at Netrunner. If this is the case, there are plenty of solutions in universe. It could also be a Metroidvania situation. It could be the case of the Regent knows where his Void Form card is, but to actually unlock the gate to get the Void Form card, he needs the missile launcher, and to get the missile launcher, he needs to fight the Insatiable. That could very well be what's going on here. This is very reminiscent of a Metroid situation, of a Samus situation, where you have the bag of spilling at the start of the journey. Quick aside, I absolutely need a Metroidvania starring the Regent. The Regent Prime 2 Echoes would go Infinity Platinum. This is my earnest plea to Anthony and Casey. Please make a Metroidvania starring the Regent, and my life is yours. There is a bigger entity in the room. There is a Louse progenitor in the room that we have not discussed yet, which is the basic action card. In Netrunner, you are not limited only to the cards in your hand in terms of what you can do with your clicks. There are also basic actions you can take at any time. For instance, you can spend one of your clicks to draw a card from your deck. You can spend one of your clicks to gain 1 credit. In Netrunner, this is absolutely essential. Using the basic action card is, in many ways, the backbone of how you play the game. I think it is not hyperbole to say the basic action card is the single most important card in the entire game. This is partially because of the economic benefits of being able to trade random clicks here and there for card draw. Like, that's very good. But it is also because making runs is the core of the game in Netrunner, and click to make a run is part of the basic action card. You don't have to have a card in your hand that tells you you can make a run. You can just click to make a run with the basic action card. Extremely important. Other things that make the basic action card very strong, in certain matchups, removing tags, which is basically something that like isn't relevant at all in Slay the Spire, but in Netrunner, in certain matchups, if you don't remove tags, it can just lose you the game on the spot. Click to draw and click for a credit are essential backbones of the economy in any deck, even if it is well made, even if it is optimized. This is not a play skill reliant thing. If anything, using the basic action card as efficiently as possible is more important at the highest levels of play than it is as you start out the game. It doesn't matter how good your deck is, it doesn't matter how good you are, you have to use the basic action card and you have to use it well. A good example of this actually came up in the World Championships in 2024. This is what will end up being the final game in the 2024 World Championships, in which Arizon is crowned the champion of Netrunner for 2024. Arizon is currently running Deer's central servers. Arizon is the runner, Deer is the corp. Arizon is currently behind 1-4 and is running the corp's central servers in an attempt to land a deep dive. Arizon's currently got 4 cards in hand, which matters a lot against Jinteki Personal Evolution, the corp in question here, because what Jinteki Personal Evolution does is it says whenever an agenda is scored or stolen, deal 1 damage, 1 net damage to the runner. That stacks up very quickly, and it can create combo turns in which Jinteki PE can deal a bunch of damage and kill from relatively high cards in hand. But it also creates a looming threat of pressure where if you ever misspend your resources just a little bit too much and have 1 too few card in hand, you can just die. So Arizon is currently behind 1-4, which is a bad place to be against Jinteki PE because that puts you on the back foot and forces you to make riskier plays. Currently, Arizon is going for a deep dive. Deep dive effectively says steal an agenda. Technically that's not what it says, but it says something very, very similar to that in practice. So Arizon is about to land the deep dive. And to land the deep dive, we'll have to go down to 3 cards in hand total. That matters quite a bit. Obviously, the Jinteki PE damage means that effectively if Arizon steals an agenda, Arizon will only be at 2 cards in hand. But if the specific agenda that Arizon steals is Fuji Asset Retrieval, then Arizon will actually be at 0 cards in hand because Fuji Asset Retrieval deals an additional 2 damage whenever it is scored or stolen. So, here come the cards from Deep Dive. As I have cleverly foreshadowed, one of them will in fact be Fuji Asset Retrieval. We'll see it shortly. So Fuji Asset Retrieval here. This will take Arizon up to 4 points, tying the score, but will require going down to 0 cards in hand, which is one of those very dangerous places to be against PE, because if PE can score a single agenda on their turn, that deals 1 damage, you have 0 cards in hand, you flatline, you die, you lose. So it is a pretty big risk stealing the Fuji Asset Retrieval, going down to 0 cards in hand. You will see a ping of 2 damage and then a ping of 1 damage. Arizon will be at 0 cards in hand. Now, Arizon has 1 click left. That does mean Arizon can spend 1 click, use the basic action card, and draw 1 card to go up to 1 card in hand. That protects Arizon from the exact case of the corpse scoring 1 agenda that doesn't have an additional effect to deal damage. As it turns out, this turn's relatively long, so we won't sit around and watch the whole thing. As it turns out, that is exactly what happens on this turn. Deer is able to fast advance an agenda out, deal 1 damage, but not 2. So, clicking to draw a card on this turn is an essential reason for why Arizon was able to win the Netrunner World Championships. Another example comes from the 2016 World Championships. What you've just seen, so this is Chris Dyer playing as NBN controlling the message against Max. Max's game plan, without going too into the weeds, is to play these cards called Data Leak Reversal, or DLR, onto the field, and use them to trash the corp's entire deck, rather than scoring out points so that you mill them and win via the alternate win condition of milling. Chris Dyer has just trashed the last Data Leak Reversal that Ben Nee had in play before playing Levy AR Lab Access to reshuffle the deck and effectively start back over. Ben had to respond by playing Levy AR Lab Access, which cost all of the credits he had. Ben Nee is currently at 0 credits, does not have a DLR in play. Chris has a little bit of money. Chris is low on cards, but is starting to threaten a potential comeback, starting to threaten to at least get back in the game, score some agendas, and make things a little bit interesting. How does Ben Nee respond to this? Ben draws 5 cards off of Levy AR Lab Access, again, has 0 credits. Start of turn triggers, Max draws a card. There is a Data Leak Reversal in hand. Now, to install Data Leak Reversal, Ben has to run a central server and have a successful run. So to do that, Ben clicks to gain 1 credit to get through pop-up window, and now drops 2 Data Leak Reversals, and the game is effectively over. This is the finals of the World Championships in what was considered one of the most competitive years in the history of the game. This is a back-breaking play. This essentially says, okay, I've taken this from I probably win 75% of the time to I win 100% of the time and there is nothing you can do about it. Chris did go on to win the World Championships in the following game, but the only reason that game even happened is because Ben Nee clicked for a credit. Now, all that said, we have talked largely about the Netrunner skills, the deck building, the piloting in-game. We do have to zoom out because to be successful as a competitive Netrunner player, you need to be good at more than just playing Netrunner. In particular, endurance is an extremely important part of winning a Netrunner tournament. If we zoom back out to our premise, every combat, so every regular combat, every elite, every boss, is a game of Netrunner. There are about 48 floors in a run of Slay the Spire or Slay the Spire 2. There are 3 floors within every act that cannot be combats. You're guaranteed an ancient, you're guaranteed a chest, and you're guaranteed a campfire before every boss. So if we take those out and we add in, you're probably going to take some campfires, you're probably going to take some shops, you're probably going to take some question marks that end up being events. There are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 games of Netrunner in a single run of Slay the Spire, potentially more, and they are largely in sequence. There are some breaks, but, playing a bunch of these within a short period of time in sequence. That represents 20 to 30 games of Runner. In a tournament of Netrunner, you play about as many Corp games as you play Runner games. 20 to 30 games times 2, 40 to 60 games is an insane number. That is monumental endurance. The Regent has absolute tournament beast mode enabled. Like, oh my god. The fact that the Regent is still able to play extremely stellar, pun intended, Netrunner at the end of a 60-game sequence against the hardest opponent they fought the entire run, incredible. And that is a feat. That is an athletic feat, honestly. Like, the Regent is incredible at the physical game involved in being good at tournament Netrunner. He absolutely hydrates. If you're not hydrated, hydrate right the fuck now, because the Regent does, and he is coming for you. That said, there is maybe an even bigger factor than the endurance, which is the setting. Like, really, this is the door maker in the room. The Regent's opponents are, lest we forget, actively trying to kill him in real life. This is a sizable disadvantage in most card games. In most card game tournaments, both the tournament bylaws themselves and also the regulations of the municipality, state, and or federal entity that you're located in when you're playing the card game. It is like illegal according to those laws to physically harm your opponent, much less actually attempt or succeed in killing them. Like, this is a level of stress, this is a level of consternation that you simply do not have to face in any real way when you are playing even the highest stakes card games in the world. Magic tournaments where literally one decision in one game can cost you multiple tens of thousands of dollars. At least you don't get shot by the Entomancer. The worst part, maybe, is that the Regent's opponents aren't even doing this to win at Netrunner. They're doing it for the love of the game. Their joy in life is turning the Regent into a fine red mist. Like, that is what they live for. I have never played Netrunner against a beetle the size of an all-terrain vehicle, much less one that gives me the tender debuff in real life and makes me feel weaker and more enervated the more actions I take. I also never want to. That doesn't sound fun, but the Regent has to do that most runs. The Regent honestly deserves a lot of benefit of the doubt on some of the finer points when it comes to deck building and play in game, because I've never played Netrunner against people that are actually trying to kill me, where if I misplay, I get gored. That's not a typical card game experience. Most people don't have experience with that for good reason. This is a setting that I think most of us would struggle to perform well in. We do ultimately have to answer the question, does the Regent suck at Netrunner? Is the Regent a scrub that's going to go 0-3 in your local tournament? Or is the Regent going to be joining Arizon and Jeff on the stage here as a potential world champion someday? Obviously, we have to, if you specifically, yes, you, the pilot of the Regent in a given run, suck at Slay the Spire, then yes, the Regent does suck at Netrunner. For the sake of argument, we'll assume you don't. I would say in the report card, ultimately, the Regent gets a B in deck building. The Regent has limitations and quirks, and potentially just literally doesn't have all of the game pieces that are necessary. The Regent makes a few correct decisions, such as playing with the most busted identity that has ever been printed in the game. That is a good decision. Good job. It's also a very, very obvious one that literally anyone interested in winning a game of Netrunner would make. He doesn't get that many flowers for that decision. Some of the weirdness with deck building, it's hard to say that the Regent is an actively good deck builder. The Regent seems like an okay deck builder. In terms of tournament play, in terms of the physical aspect, the endurance, mental acuity at the end of a long day, the Regent is maybe the best to ever do that. A+ on that. In terms of intangibles, the Regent is literally playing Netrunner in settings I would die in. A on that front. Good job, the Regent. You're very, very good at keeping it together. In terms of runner play, I would give the Regent a B or so. Really, this comes down to there are so many places where the Regent's play could be better if you could just spend one of your energy to gain 1 star without having a card in hand that let you do that. If you could spend 1 energy to draw a card from your deck without having a card in your hand that lets you do that. Not using the basic action card is such a hindrance when it comes to your play. The fact that you can't do that stuff, the fact that you can't use the basic action card, either because the Regent doesn't like doing so or doesn't know that he's able to, that in and of itself has to knock down a full letter grade down to B. And as we discussed, we only ever see the Regent play runner. We never see the Regent play corp. In any tournament, you have to play both sides. It is literally impossible to complete a tournament of Netrunner playing only one side of the game. If you want to be really good, if you want to win big tournaments, you have to be successful at playing both runner and corp. There's no way around it. Yes, one of your decks might be better. Yes, you might be better at playing one side than the other, but if you lose all of your games of corp and you win all of your games of runner, you're going to finish in the middle of the pack. I can attest to that myself. At one of the world championships, I went undefeated as corp, and I only won 2 games as runner, and I was not even close to making the top 8 that year. Overall, it's less informative to talk about a specific point in time estimate of someone's skill. I think it's a lot more interesting to talk about their potential skill range over the course of a career playing the game. I like to look at that in terms of their skill floor and their skill ceiling. Given what we know about the Regent right right now, how bad of a player could the Regent end up being, and how good of a player could the Regent end up being? Obviously, ranges can be very wide. The universe could align, the stars could align, the card alignment could get played a number of times, anything could happen, sure. What are kind of the realistic upper and lower ranges of the Regent's skill as a Netrunner player? I've put together a number of levels with somewhat informative titles, and I'm going to start at the very, very top with Dan and Sokka. For those who don't play competitive Netrunner and aren't super familiar with the scene, this is like saying Michael Jordan and LeBron James. It's just an argument who's number one and who's number two. Right below that, we have numbered playmats. I've named the tier numbered playmats because in the Netrunner World Championships, if you place in the top 16, you get a playmat that is not only unique to people who placed well at that tournament, but also has your number, what place you finished in. This is a person who's proven that they can compete at the absolute top levels of the game, but aren't the literal GOAT. Below that is a tier that I've called Purdue. An interesting fact about the NCAA basketball men's championship, also known as March Madness, despite the fact that Purdue is year in and year out a perennial power, about the lowest seed you tend to see them as is an 8, and they're often up in the 3 range, 2 range, sometimes they're a 1 seed. Year in and year out, very, very good team, have literally never won the championship. We're talking about players like that. They're very good players. Everyone knows that they're good. Everyone knows that they could break through at any given time, but they haven't yet. Right below that is a tier that I like to call bad draw at regionals. At a large regional tournament, something that's not as big as the absolute biggest tournaments of the year, like a Continentals or a Worlds, you show up at those tournaments, and if you're a really good competitive grinder in the game, you kind of expect to sit down against someone in round 1 who's a little bit of a scrub. It's a bad draw if you get someone who's actually pretty dang good at the game. That's the tier of people we're talking about. They haven't broken through at that next level, but if you sit down against them at a regionals, you're really, really mad because you could have played a scrub instead. Instead, you have to play someone who's actually quite good at the game. The tier below this is basically the same type of person, but at a lower tier of tournament, like a store championships. They're always going to be the store champs, pretty good at the game. They're going to bring a deck that's potentially a little off the wall, but you could absolutely lose to them any given day of the week. Below that, I have a tier that I call Blame It on the Jank. Interestingly, there is a type of player who tends to only play jank decks and is very good at piloting them. They don't really fit in this tier. That sort of player is more of a store champ stalwart or bad draw at regionals because they're a very good player. It's just that they happen to like playing decks that are weird and janky. Blame It on the Jank as a tier is more someone who has really never put effort into improving at the game and plays jank to kind of hide their own ego. It's not me that's wrong, it's the fact that I'm playing jank cards. Below Blame It on the Jank is a new player. Netrunner is a game with a really, really steep learning curve. New players are at the beginning of that learning curve, and as a result, oftentimes just don't have the right instincts, don't have the right intuition built up. Obviously, any individual new player can improve very quickly and get good very quickly, but typically when you start off at this game, you are near the lower range of the skill range just because there's a lot that's unique to Netrunner you have to pick up. And below newbie, we have a scrub. This is someone who actively learns bad habits, refuses to improve. They're like actively worse than someone who doesn't know how to play the game because they've learned how to play the game wrong. Now, where does the Regent fall in this range? I think the floor for the Regent is the Blames It on the Jank tier. We see some bad habits from the Regent right now, only being willing to play certain cards, not being willing to use the basic action card when he should, relying on a single broken gimmick in the idea that he plays. This definitely represents a scenario where the Regent never corrects his bad habits, never makes an attempt to intentionally improve at the game, and just kind of stays very middling on all fronts. I think this also represents a scenario where the corp play that the Regent exhibits is worse than we would expect based on his runner play. This also kind of represents a scenario where the Regent goes solo, is just this solo jank artist, never really teams up with other people, never really joins a testing group or learns to improve or has regular practice on off days. How good do I think the Regent could be? quite good, actually. It's very difficult to say that this guy could be the GOAT, but I think he could be one step from it. This obviously represents a scenario where the bad habits we've identified get taken care of through intentional practice. The Regent learns to deck build well, learns to use the basic action card correctly, learns to kind of get over his own biases in how to approach the game, probably joins a good testing group. This also represents a scenario where the corp play is as good or better than we would expect, given the runner play. That ends up not being an unexpected weakness. And absolutely, like, one of the biggest weaknesses we saw in the Regent's skill as a Netrunner player was in the deck building experience. For the Regent to reach this tier, for the Regent to actually reach his ceiling, he has to either find himself as a deck builder, and actively that becomes an area of strength, or he needs to find a good deck builder to work with. That's a pattern. That's like a common thing with testing groups, where some people in the testing group will be really good deck builders, some people will just be very good at playing the game, and those synergize very well, because the best way to find out if a theory crafted deck that you think is good is actually good is to play against someone who's good. I think the Regent could very much be half of that dynamic, and could potentially be both halves if he really gets the support and takes the game seriously. And I know that I didn't put him in the Dan or Sokka tier, but I do want to call out Dan specifically, because I see some interesting parallels between the Regent and Dan Dargenio. Now, obviously, Dan Dargenio is one of the greatest of all time in the game. It would be ludicrous for me to call the shot and say, oh yeah, the Regent's definitely going to be the third GOAT up there with Dan and Sokka. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying, though, that I see some interesting parallels. In particular, Dan was a monster in the tournament game. Dan moved quickly, he made decisions very quickly, he thought quickly, he spoke quickly. His actions per second were maybe the highest in the entire competitive scene. He would just make decisions. He would make decisions quickly, and they would be correct. It was terrifying playing against Dan Dargenio, because it just felt like he was a machine. He would never make the wrong decision. If he lost, it was because both players had taken good lines, and either things had bounced out against Dan, or the other player just found a really good line that was able to counter the best thing that Dan was able to do. Playing against Dan felt like you were suffocating. Hell, forget playing against Dan. Finishing your match with 15 minutes left in the round, noticing that your teammate is still playing, walking over to watch his game, realizing he's paired up against Dan Dargenio, and watching Dan Dargenio play in a game you're not even taking part in felt like you were suffocating. It felt like all of the choices, all of the decision space, all of the oxygen in the game was being squeezed out until all that was left was to lose. It is genuinely hard to overstate, and I think it's hard to even communicate it to people who haven't seen him in action, how terrifying it was to sit across the table from him and just see him go into this whir of motion and just make correct decision after correct decision after correct decision at a speed that, like, you can't even think at. That is one of the parallels I actually see to the Regent. The Regent has the tournament game, the ability to perform under pressure, the ability to, at the end of a long tournament day, still operate at maximum, still make correct decisions, all of the gears turning as they should, everything working in synergy. In the upper scenario, it would be terrifying to play against the Regent in the same way that it is terrifying to play against Dan Dargenio. Another parallel I've noticed, Dan is like a very solid deck builder. In no way am I saying Dan is a B tier deck builder. That would be insane for me to say. It is not something I'm saying. The Regent does have a noted weakness in the deck building area. On the report card, that was a B rather than the A+ that he has in tournament play. I am obviously not saying that that is true about Dan. He's extremely good at taking the core concept of why a deck is strong and explaining it in a way where you can go out and play that deck well yourself. Very good deck builder. However, over the course of his career, he did benefit from working with a number of the absolute strongest deck builders the game has ever seen, like Josh01, TBU3K. He did benefit from working with people who were A+ deck builders. If the Regent finds himself in a scenario where that's true, the ceiling could be even higher than the one that I gave before, given the right support. So, am I saying the Regent is the GOAT? No, but I think the Regent could potentially become the GOAT. So really, as a community, we need to come together to convince the Regent to spend his time on what he is truly good at. Stop fighting Mr. Bees, stop fighting the Doormaker, stop fighting the Nibbit, get out of the Spire, Netrunner needs you. We need strong players now more than ever. The Regent, please, come crash land into this planet. Wait, hold on.